The season hasn't even started yet, and the Marlins are already getting bitten by the injury bug. But it's Friday, which means it's a mailbag episode.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Marlins. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. Go hit me up over on X at Jeremiah Geiger2. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Smash that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment down below about your Miami Marlins. And on today's show, I'm going to be talking about the injury bug that has bitten the Marlins in their organization. A couple key guys in the organization injured. Edward Cabrera, PJ Morlando, the Marlins top draft pick. News came out that he will be undergoing a procedure. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to get into the mailbag episode, which will be the first segment. A lot of good questions. As always, if you have questions for the show, drop them in the comments or hit me up on X, and I'll do my best to get to each and every one of them throughout the week, but especially Friday, because Friday is the mailbag episode. So before I get into that, of course, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So a little bit of an upgrade there from FanDuel, from $150 to $200. Go check it out, guys, if you haven't already. Let's dive into the mailbag. I'm going to start by a question from Dominicus over on X. He said, reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became a Marlins fan. So how I became a Marlins fan is pretty simple, right? I was a football fan the majority of my life. Now, I grew up on the West Coast, actually. So I'm not from Miami. I'm not from Florida. But I loved football. That was my first love. I was a huge sports guy. I mean, I'd spend all my time reading sports magazines or almanacs, books, whatever, watching as much as I could. And then around 11 years old, I started getting into baseball. For whatever reason, I decided, you know what? I want to start watching baseball. I enjoy it. And 2014, I was watching a Seattle Mariners and Miami Marlins game. And I was rooting for the Mariners because, well, living on the West Coast, living in Oregon, that was the team that was closest to me. I was like, okay, I'll be a Mariners fan, I guess. I wasn't invested. I mean, I was a kid. I didn't really know a ton of players or anything. But I'm watching this game at my grandparents' house on TV, and I see Giancarlo Stanton hit a walk-off grand slam. Just absolutely crushed it. And from that point onward, I became a diehard Marlins fan out of nowhere. That I don't remember the reason why. I just remember seeing that one play, that walk-off grand slam, and becoming a huge Giancarlo Stanton fan, a huge Miami Marlins fan. And that was 2014. So that was my second season of watching baseball or paying attention to baseball even. So 2014, that grand slam happens. I follow the Marlins after that. I'm watching them as much as I can. I'm listening to my mom's Sirius XM radio about the Marlins games. I mean, Glenn Geffner, Dave Van Horn, absolute legends calling those games. And that was when Rich Waltz was the TV announcer for the Marlins. So a lot of great memories watching the Fish play that season, because 2014, it was a competitive year. They were competitive through the deadline. They actually made a couple deadline moves. If you remember, the Marlins traded for Jared Cosart at the deadline. They actually had Kike Hernandez. I believe they traded Kike Hernandez away at that deadline. But either way, it was a fun season to become a Marlins fan, a season in which you felt like the Marlins were competitive. Ultimately, they didn't make the playoffs that year, but that year cemented me as a diehard fan. I mean, I was living and dying on every Marlins game that season, became really emotionally invested. And 2015 rolled around, and my love for the Marlins just kept getting stronger. And it got to the point today where I get to host this wonderful podcast, the Locked On Marlins podcast. I had started a couple years ago my own podcast called the Marlins 9 podcast, and that was fun. It was a good experience, and now I get to do it to a larger audience and talk about my favorite baseball team. So it's really a blessing. But that's how I became a Marlins fan. That one Giancarlo Stanton grand slam. Second question is from Flip the M305, everyday listener to the show. Also, shout out Dominicus for the question. I do appreciate you as an everyday listener tuning in, watching the show, and submitting the questions. Flip the M305 says he has two questions. I'll go with the first one here. If Agustin Ramirez is going to start AAA as catcher and we pour everything into him to be the catcher, what do we do with Joe Mack? So I don't think that's as big a problem as you make it out to be, because Joe Mack is going to be a catcher long term. The jury's still out on Agustin Ramirez. I don't want you to worry about either one of them getting, I guess, roadblocks in their development, because both of them are expected to start out at AAA. And the reason why, I think Agustin Ramirez will be in Miami sooner rather than later. I do think he starts the year in AAA. He'll be sent down shortly, and that's fine. It's nothing against him. But you're right. They do want to give him every opportunity to catch. So I assume that they're just going to rotate at the position. Ramirez catches, Matt catches, and whoever's not catching, the bat is still going to be in the lineup. We know what we have with Joe Mack and his defense. Obviously, you want to keep him in a consistent routine behind the plate, so he feels comfortable back there. But you also want to give reps to Agustin Ramirez while giving him the opportunity to face AAA pitching and stay warm while he waits for a call-up. I think Ramirez gets called up before Joe Mack. Joe Mack probably will get called up in the back half of the season, but both of them should be getting catching time. They both should get playing time at the catching position, and it's just a matter of time before Ramirez gets called up. I really do think that. And I think in Miami, the decision will be made early on whether they want to keep him as a catcher long term. When he comes up, I envision him first base designated hitter type, and maybe he'll catch in the majors. I don't know. I know there's two sides of it. One side thinks, just stop the experiment already. His bat is the most important thing. I want to see the Marlins organization give him as much time possible in AAA. So split time with Joe Mack. Both of them get behind the plate, get their reps in. But when Ramirez gets called up, Joe Mack obviously will have the AAA job all to himself until he gets called up, hopefully in the second half. The second question, it's a really good question. If you can have any guest, future or current Marlin, on the show, who would it be? Wow. Well, I would like to have a couple guests. I'm going to give you two here. First one, my favorite player of all time is Giancarlo Stanton. I'd love to talk to Giancarlo Stanton. One of the baseballs behind me there is a Giancarlo Stanton autographed baseball. I loved watching him play. And the second player I would love to have on the podcast would be Ichiro Suzuki. I know he was a Marlin for just a short tenure, but just one of the best baseball players to ever play the game. He was one of my dad's favorite players. Loved watching him in Miami, even though it was in the back half of his career. And I loved everything about him. I loved how he played the game. I think Ichiro could have hit 25, 30 home runs if he really wanted to. But he was an artist at the plate. He could place the ball wherever he wanted. Most hits ever in a single season. I mean, the guy was, in his prime, was unstoppable. And he was a great defender, an absolute cannon for an arm. I don't think a lot of people not underestimate, but a lot of people think about his hitting, but his defense was just as good. I mean, he had an absolute rocket for a right arm in the outfield. I'd love to talk to Ichiro and discuss it with his with him, his work ethic, and everything about his Major League Baseball career. Those are two players I'd love to talk to. Great questions. Coming up next, I am going to discuss the injury bug that has started to creep in to the Marlins organization. It's unfortunate, but it happens. It's part of baseball. That's coming up right after this. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. If you got your eye on a few underdogs this season, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on so you can stay in the action. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So, visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. If you're an everyday listener, of course, if you left a mailbag question, thank you for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your way to work, the gym, wherever you are. Locked on Marlins every single day. It's your team every day. And I appreciate you tuning in and listening to me talk about the Marlins. So, the injury bug for the Marlins. Geez, it is not looking good right now. Edward Cabrera, I want to talk about him first. He exits his most recent start with a blister on his right middle finger. So, essentially what that means, guys, with Edward Cabrera dealing with a blister, he's not going to be in the starting rotation to start the year. And it's another injury to a pitcher that I think is on his last chance. His last shot to prove that he can be a quality and consistent starter in the major leagues, and he's already getting injured. The first thing to note, though, is he wasn't being productive in his first few spring training starts. He was getting absolutely shelled. So not only are you adding insult to injury with the production just not being there, now you actually have an injury and you have a blister that you're going to have to heal up. It's going to take a little bit of time. So Edward Cabrera will not be in the rotation to start the season. It's not going to happen. Like the Fish on First guy said, he's not stretched out right now. He hasn't pitched above 3 innings. He hasn't got the workload necessary, and now you factor in this blister. It's not good. So the production issues for Edward Cabrera, the consistency issues. At first, the first couple starts, he wasn't walking anybody. He was just getting hit really hard. And then he was getting hit really hard and still walking people. And now he's got to deal with a minor injury. So it's not good. I don't know where the Marlins really want to pivot away from Edward Cabrera to start the year, which way they're going to go. I would want, then this is my take, I would like to see Adam Mazur slide into the rotation. A lot of people say Valente Bayozo, and Bayozo started off really hot last year. He started spring training looking pretty good, but he's very hittable. And this spring training, he's got hit really, really hard. Had a couple good outings at first this spring, and then it's just earn run after earn run, home run after home run. And it's like, I mean, he could eat some innings, but this is what I was talking about. The depth is going to be an issue for the Marlins moving forward. Adam Mazur, I think, is the second guy who should be talked about as a potential replacement for Edward Cabrera in the rotation to start the season. And if he performs well for the rest of the season, I think Cabrera's time as a starting pitcher has to be over. Just drop it. End the experiment. We've seen this story before. It's not going to work out. The potential has always been there. I understand that. The stuff has always been there. I understand that. But there's two things here. The best ability is availability, and he's dealing with a blister. And the second thing is he's never put it together. In 5 years now with the Marlins, he's never put it together to warrant any trust in him being a consistent starter. Adam Mazur has a very deep arsenal. He's somebody that has major league experience starting. And when he was acquired by the Marlins last year at the deadline, there was tangible improvement in his development in the minor leagues. The Padres rushed him, and now he's got a good fastball, good velocity. He's not a soft tosser where Bayozo is a soft tosser. Bayozo has to hit his spots perfectly because at 90, 91 miles an hour, if you throw that center cut, it's going to get hit for a home run almost every time, or an extra base hit, or the exit velocities. These are major league hitters. They're going to hit the ball hard. So you have to be perfect with your stuff. Mazur, the one thing about him that is a great profile as a starting pitcher is he's the antithesis of an Edward Cabrera. He has that command. He doesn't walk anybody. So Adam Mazur potentially could be in the starting rotation. That's what I would like to see happen. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for him moving forward because I do think he will stick. He has a chance to stick in the rotation this season. I think he's major league ready as much as possible, I guess. I mean, there's really not much more he can do. He's shown development last year. He's had a good spring. You've seen his stuff. His arsenal's deep. And I think he's the next guy up. I know he got assigned to minor league camp. It was a bit of a surprise at that time, but with Cabrera going down, maybe his name gets called up. The other injury that's unfortunate but has to be talked about is the top draft pick from last season, PJ Morlando. According to Christina De Nicola, butchering names today, but PJ Morlando underwent an ulnar nerve transposition on his left elbow. So he's going to be out for 8 to 10 weeks. So it's not a Tommy John surgery. It's not going to keep him out for a long time, but 2 months. I mean, we're approaching the end of spring training, so he's going to miss all of April and maybe into May. So that's not good for somebody who was your first round draft pick last season and is now battling his second injury. I mean, last year he got hurt in a weightlifting competition. I mean, that's a freak accident, I guess you could call it. But he injured his back last season, only had one plate appearance in the Marlins organization. And now before the minor league schedule comes into fruition, the games start, he's already going to be sidelined. And it's just not good to see. It's really disappointing news to see a player like that, especially one of your top picks, battle through injuries. And you hope that doesn't become a trend moving forward. And you hope there's no further setbacks. The Marlins already have their top left-handed reliever, Andrew Nardi, and he's experienced setbacks. He hasn't pitched in spring training yet. So he's going to start the season most likely again on the injured list. And he's one of their top bullpen arms. So you have Andrew Nardi, Edward Cabrera, who's the severity and the recovery time for the blister. Of course, I don't know yet, but it's unlikely he pitches in the opening day rotation. And now PJ Morlando, one of your higher regarded prospects in the system. I mean, you believed in him enough to take him in the first round, and he goes down. Victor Mesa Jr., another guy. He is not going to be able to play in the spring breakout game. He suffered a hamstring injury a couple weeks ago, hasn't gotten any action in the Grapefruit League, and he's somebody who's knocking on the door of the major leagues. It's battling injury, and it's another guy from last season who is injured also. One of the biggest things for the Marlins in order to have a successful season, wins and losses aside, is to avoid the injury bug. You don't want to see more players get injured, and you don't want the current injured players to relapse and re-injure whatever's affecting them. So take their time. They got to take their time to get healthy and get back on the field as healthy as possible, 100% healthy. But you have to try to do everything you can to avoid the injury bug. The strength and conditioning coaches, the nutrition, everything has to be locked in order to avoid injuries, because an injury-riddled season for the Marlins, especially with the depth they have and the pitching depth concerns in the starting rotation, could be catastrophic. Coming up next, I'm going to talk about a former Marlin player. He had some comments about the Miami Marlins and how they did things over here. I'm going to talk about that right after this. Our good friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and you wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, it gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set your goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. 50%, guys. That's a good deal. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome in again to Locked On Marlins, third and final segment coming up right after I get a sip of water here. And I want to talk about Jazz Chisholm Jr. Yes, that is the player who had some comments about the Marlins in a recent article. This is from the Daily News. Daily News, Gary Phillips over at the New York Daily News. He had an article about the New York Yankees and the facial hair, but there was a comment about Jazz Chisholm Jr., what he said. I'm going to quote this here. Chisholm told the News when asked if it was tougher to be himself as a Marlin. He said, yes, 100%. I felt like Miami had more rules than here. Quote, as a newcomer, he expected life with the Yankees to be a little bit more strict. But now he says that he's super comfortable here and he wouldn't want to go nowhere else, honestly. What pressure does Jazz Chisholm Jr. have in New York compared to here in Miami? That's the question. Because in my mind, I think of New York as the big market team. You just came off a World Series appearance. He's been there half a year. He's been in the World Series. I think the pressure on him there would be immense. And I think that him saying that the Marlins had more rules than the Yankees and it was tougher for him to express himself in Miami, in a small market, I mean, not a small market team, but a environment in which the spotlight isn't on you, that's not really encouraging stuff. And I hope that isn't the case moving forward for younger Marlins players. Look, baseball is changing. Baseball, there's old school train of thought and there's new school train of thought when it comes to expressing yourself on the baseball field. I loved Jazz's personality. I loved what he brought to the ballpark every day. Regardless of his performance, he was himself, and that's how it should be. I don't think anybody should feel like they have to suppress their personality while playing a game. At the end of the day, baseball is a game. It's a professional sport, yes, and there's class and sportsmanship, and I'm all for that. But celebrating your personality and being yourself on the field, whether that's how you rock your chains or you dye your hair, we've seen Jazz do all that, and he's a very vocal person. He's going to say his mind. So the fact that he feels more comfortable doing that in New York in the short time that he's been here rather than Miami, I don't really understand that. I think moving forward, the Marlins should be a fun team. They should be a place where players can feel free to be themselves. Moving forward, you want to see guys with big personalities and you want that star attention. Look, I'm going to keep it a buck. Jazz Chisholm Jr. is not a star player. On the field, he's not a superstar. He's not going to put up the numbers like Bobby Witt Jr. or Ronald Acuna Jr. or Aaron Judge. But he has a personality that fans gravitate toward. And there's a section of fans that hate him for it. And that's with any player. You're going to have fans who hate you, fans who support you. But I think Jazz Chisholm Jr. being himself in New York is a great thing. And I think that's how it should be in Miami. I don't like that that's what he had to say, that he felt it was more difficult in Miami, that there were more rules here. I'm not sure what rules he's necessarily referring to. But I do think moving forward, when the Marlins have somebody that they feel like they can be themselves, that you got to just play the game, have fun. It's baseball. Like I said, it's a game. At the end of the day, they're getting paid money to play a kid's game. I think that's a great thing. You want to have fun playing baseball. It's a game. Couple spring training notes here. Spring breakout game, which is Friday. Adam Major, Dax Fulton, Victor Mesa Jr., Aiden May, and PJ Morlando are all out of the spring breakout game. You can't see them because they won't be playing. It's disappointing. I know. I wanted to see Morlando. I talked about the injury. I wanted to see Aiden May too. Another prospect who I've talked about a little bit before. Great slider. He's not playing. I don't know exactly why yet. I'm curious as to the reasons why they're not playing. I assume Victor Mesa Jr., the reason he's not playing is still with the hamstring injury. But those 5 players will not be participating. And the replacements for them will be Abraham Ramirez, Nathan Martorella, Jacob Miller, Jesse Bergen, and Will Schomburg. Not sure if it's Bergen or Bergen, but those are the replacements for the spring breakout game. Disappointing, especially Morlando, because he's somebody, again, coming off of a season in which he was your first-round draft pick, and he only has 1 at-bat. And now he is going to start the season injured. But that's the spring breakout game. I'm looking forward to it. I did have one more mailbag question. I almost forgot about it. I'm going to pull it up right here. I almost forgot about this mailbag question, but I have to get to it. James Roberto, he says, who are you most excited to see in the spring breakout? So it ties into this. Well, James, I was really excited to see Aiden May. I was excited to see PJ Morlando, but unfortunately, they're going to be out. They're not going to be playing. So besides those guys, I'm really excited to see Thomas White. Thomas White, the Marlins' #1 overall prospect, absolute stud. I think he can be an ace one day for the Marlins. I think of him that highly. He is going to be the starter in the spring breakout game. So if that's the easy answer, it might be. But Thomas White, really excited to watch him pitch and just see what that velocity looks like. I mean, I heard he touched 100 miles per hour this offseason. Does he rear back and fire a triple-digit fastball right off the bat? Maybe. We'll see. Well, I want to see those breaking balls, and overall, it's just going to be a fun experience. So looking forward to watching that game and seeing how these prospects do. Regardless, guys, The Marlins prospects, the farm system is trending upward. They have to avoid the injury bug. They have to recover as best as they can. PJ Morlando, wishing you the best of recoveries. Get back on the field as soon as possible. I got to see that power play in the Marlins organization. With that, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked on Marlins. Until next time, stay safe and let's go fish.